The day they tried to take away our bicycles, nobody realized they were actually changing the future of our entire neighborhood. I still remember the sound of those wheels turning that morning, the soft clicking of bicycle chains, the laughter of children racing down Willow Creek sidewalks, the warm smell of fresh coffee drifting from open kitchen windows. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday that made families choose a place like ours to call home. Until one email changed everything. My name is Ryan Carter, and for years I believed Willow Creek was the kind of community where people solved problems together. Neighbors knew each other. Parents watched out for every child on the street. The sidewalks weren't just pieces of concrete. They were where kids learned independence, where friendships started, and where ordinary moments became memories. That morning, my son was riding his blue bicycle near the park with two friends. They weren't speeding. They weren't causing trouble. They slowed down whenever someone walked by and moved carefully around families with strollers. They were doing exactly what we had always taught them to do. Then my phone vibrated. The message came from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. At first, I thought it was another routine community update. Maybe a reminder about landscaping or an upcoming event. I opened it casually. Then I saw the subject line. Proposed Community Bicycle Restriction Policy. I read the first paragraph once, then twice. The HOA was proposing a complete ban on bicycles being ridden on neighborhood sidewalks. Their reason was safety. They claimed the restriction would protect pedestrians and create a more controlled environment throughout the community. But as I continued reading, something felt wrong. There was no mention of a major accident, no emergency situation, no evidence that our sidewalks had suddenly become dangerous. Just a decision that would affect every family with a child who owned a bicycle. Within minutes, the neighborhood group chat came alive. Parents posted screenshots of the email. Some were angry. Some were confused. Others simply asked the same question everyone seemed to have. Why? Now, across the street, my neighbor pulled her daughter's bicycle back into the garage. A father at the end of the block told his son to wait until they understood the new rule. The sounds that had filled our mornings disappeared almost instantly. The sidewalks became strangely quiet. Later that afternoon, I attended the HOA information session where Patricia Collins, the board president, explained the proposal. Patricia was calm, professional, and confident. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't trying to create conflict. She genuinely believed this restriction was the responsible choice. She talked about safety concerns and protecting residents. Listening to her, I realized something important. This wasn't a fight between good people and bad people. It was a fight between a quick solution and a complete understanding of the problem. Patricia believed banning bicycles would remove the risk. But I wondered if removing something from a community was always the same as making it better. When I returned home that evening, my son's bicycle was still sitting beside the garage door. The same bicycle he had ridden almost every day. The same bicycle that represented freedom, confidence, and childhood. I looked at it for a long time. I wasn't against rules. Communities needed them. Safety mattered. But a rule that affected hundreds of families deserved more than assumptions. It deserved facts. And before Willow Creek voted on a decision that could change our neighborhood forever, I knew I had to find out the truth behind the proposal. The first thing I learned after reading the HOA proposal again was that decisions like this are rarely built from one single moment. They come from conversations, assumptions, and information that may never be questioned. If I wanted to understand why Patricia Collins and the board believed a bicycle ban was necessary, I couldn't just react to the announcement. I needed to look deeper. I needed to find the story behind the rule. The next morning, I drove to the Willow Creek HOA clubhouse. The building looked exactly the same as it always had. Fresh flowers near the entrance. Clean windows reflecting the morning sunlight. A quiet community garden. Beside the walkway. From the outside, it looked like a place built for neighbors to connect. But inside those walls were the documents that could explain how a simple safety concern turned into a complete neighborhood restriction. I submitted a homeowner records request and waited for access to the available files. When the documents were provided, I carried a thick folder into a small meeting room at the back of the clubhouse. The smell of old paper and printer ink filled the air as I opened the first binder. Meeting minutes, complaint forms, safety discussions, policy proposals. I started searching for anything related to bicycles, sidewalks, or accidents. At first, I expected to find a long history of problems. I expected reports showing that children riding bikes had created a serious danger. But the more pages I reviewed, the more confused I became. There were complaints, but they were minor. One resident mentioned that a child had ridden too quickly near a walking path. Another complained about bicycles being left near a common area entrance. A few homeowners expressed concerns about noise during busy afternoon hours. Those concerns mattered. Every resident deserved to feel comfortable in their own neighborhood. But something was missing. There were no major accidents, no repeated incidents, no evidence showing that bicycles on sidewalks had become a widespread threat. The foundation of the proposed ban seemed much smaller than the rule itself. I continued reading through the records, and another detail caught my attention. The HOA had solved previous issues differently. When parking became a problem, they created clearer parking guidelines. When landscaping concerns appeared, they improved communication with homeowners. When pool safety questions came up, they focused on education and supervision. The pattern was clear. Willow Creek had always searched for balanced solutions before creating major restrictions. So why was this situation different? Why had the first solution been removing bicycles completely? I looked again at the original proposal document. The language sounded professional. It focused on safety. It used words like protection, responsibility, and community standards. But behind those words was a decision that would affect hundreds of families without first asking those families what they needed. There was no community survey, no temporary trial period, no discussion about safer alternatives, just a complete ban. I closed the binder and looked through the clubhouse window. Outside, a young boy was riding his bicycle slowly along the sidewalk while his mother walked nearby. He stopped when another resident passed, waited patiently, and continued when the path was clear. It was exactly the kind of responsible behavior the neighborhood wanted. That moment made something clear to me. The issue wasn't whether safety mattered. Everyone agreed that it did. The real question was whether banning something was the only way to create safety. I packed the documents into my folder and walked out of the clubhouse with more answers than I had when I arrived. But I also had a bigger responsibility. Facts could reveal the problem, but facts alone wouldn't change the outcome. Before the HOA vote, I needed to understand the people behind those pages. I needed to hear the voices of the neighborhood itself. The folder on my kitchen table was filled with documents, notes, and unanswered questions, but I knew something important was missing. Records could show what happened. They could reveal patterns and facts, but they couldn't explain what Willow Creek truly needed. For that, I needed to hear from the people who lived here. The following morning, I stepped outside with my notebook and started walking through the neighborhood. The same sidewalks that had become the center of the controversy looked completely ordinary. The morning sun reflected off windows. Sprinklers clicked across green lawns. Neighbors waved from driveways. Children carried backpacks toward school. It was strange seeing such a peaceful scene connected to a decision that had created so much tension. My first stop was the Peterson family's home near the community park. Their daughter Lily was outside with her bicycle, carefully practicing turns near the driveway. When her father, Mark, saw my notebook, he already knew why I was there. "You're looking into the bike ban too, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded, and he invited me to sit on the porch. What I heard from him changed the way I looked at the entire situation. Mark wasn't against rules. He wasn't demanding unlimited freedom for children. He wanted his daughter to understand responsibility. He explained that Lily had learned how to ride safely from the beginning. She knew how to slow down around pedestrians. She knew to move aside when someone was walking by. She knew that having the ability to ride a bicycle came with the responsibility to respect others. The answer isn't removing the opportunity, Mark told me. The answer is teaching kids how to use it correctly. I wrote that sentence down because it represented exactly what I had been discovering. Parents weren't ignoring safety. They were asking for a better way to achieve it. Later that afternoon, I spoke with residents who didn't have children. I wanted to understand whether the concerns behind the proposal came from people who truly felt unsafe. I visited Mrs. Anderson, a retired teacher who lived near one of the busiest walking paths. She admitted that she understood why some neighbors were worried about bicycles moving quickly near pedestrians. But she also believed the solution needed balance. A community doesn't become safer by taking everything away, she said while watching families walk through the park. Sometimes it becomes safer by helping people understand how to share. Her words stayed with me. Over the next several days, I continued talking with residents throughout Willow Creek. Some parents worried their children would lose independence. Some older residents wanted clearer expectations for young riders. Some homeowners admitted they had supported the ban simply because they assumed there had been serious problems. But when I asked if they had personally witnessed dangerous situations, many paused. They had heard concerns. They had heard rumors. But they hadn't seen evidence that matched the size of the proposed restriction. Slowly, a clearer picture began forming. Willow Creek wasn't divided into two sides. It was a neighborhood full of people who wanted the same outcome, but had different ideas about reaching it. Everyone wanted safer sidewalks. Everyone wanted respectful neighbors. Everyone wanted children and pedestrians to feel comfortable sharing the same spaces. That evening, I sat on my porch watching my son ride his bicycle down the sidewalk. He slowed when a neighbor crossed his path. He waited patiently. He continued only after the walkway was clear. It was a simple moment, but it represented everything I had learned. The problem wasn't bicycles. The problem was the absence of a better conversation. I closed my notebook and looked at the pages filled with names, stories, and ideas. Before the HOA vote, I knew exactly what needed to happen next. I didn't need to fight against the ban. I needed to show the community there was a better option waiting to be built. The more people I talked to, the clearer one truth became. Willow Creek did not need another argument. It needed another solution. The original proposal was built around one simple idea: remove bicycles, remove the risk. But after listening to residents, reviewing the records, and seeing how families actually used the neighborhood, I realized the answer couldn't be that simple. A community problem deserved a community solution. That weekend, my dining room became my planning room. The quiet space where my family usually ate dinner was covered with maps, notes, printed documents, and handwritten ideas. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as my laptop stayed open for hours, showing examples of neighborhood safety programs from communities that had faced similar challenges. My son's blue bicycle rested near the doorway, almost like a reminder of why every detail mattered. I wasn't trying to protect a bicycle. I was trying to protect the idea that rules should make communities better, not smaller. I started building a proposal called the Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative. The first principle was simple: responsibility instead of restriction. Children could continue riding on sidewalks, but everyone would understand the expectations. The plan included clearly marked slow-speed areas near playgrounds and busy walking paths. New signs would remind riders to slow down, watch for pedestrians, and share the space respectfully. Parents would receive safety guidelines so younger riders could understand proper sidewalk behavior. The goal was not to punish mistakes. The goal was to prevent them. I also included a resident feedback system. If someone had a concern, they wouldn't have to wait until frustration became a major conflict. They could report the issue, discuss it with neighbors, and work toward a solution before the HOA considered another major rule change. To me, that was the biggest lesson from the entire situation. Good communities don't avoid problems. They create better ways to solve them. I spent several evenings organizing the proposal. Every page had a purpose. Every recommendation connected back to something a resident had told me. The concerns from older homeowners were included. The experiences of parents were included. Even the opinions of residents who originally supported the ban were included. I wanted Patricia Collins and the HOA board to see that this wasn't a document written against them. It was a plan created for everyone. A few days later, I invited several neighbors to review the first draft at the community park. I expected disagreements. Instead, I saw collaboration. Parents suggested adding a bicycle safety day for children. Older residents recommended improving visibility near walking paths. Some homeowners who had supported the original restriction admitted they appreciated having another option. That moment changed everything for me. The people of Willow Creek were never truly divided. They simply hadn't been given the opportunity to build the answer together. As the sun started setting over the park, children continued riding their bicycles nearby. They slowed when people walked past. They followed the same basic rules we had always taught them. Looking at them, I realized the solution had been there all along. The neighborhood didn't need a wall between safety and freedom. It needed a bridge. I placed the final version of the proposal into my folder and prepared for the HOA meeting. This time, I wasn't walking in with a complaint. I was walking in with a possibility. And if one vote was going to decide the future of Willow Creek, I wanted every board member and every resident to have the full story before making that choice. The night of the HOA meeting arrived faster than I expected. By the time I pulled into the Willow Creek clubhouse parking lot, the entire area was already filled with cars. Through the windows, I could see groups of neighbors standing together, holding printed copies of the bicycle restriction proposal, discussing concerns, and waiting for the conversation that would decide the future of our community. I sat in my truck for a moment before walking inside. The folder containing my research rested on the passenger seat beside me. Weeks earlier, it had started as a collection of questions. Now it contained documents, conversations, and a solution that represented hundreds of voices from our neighborhood. I wasn't walking into that room to defeat Patricia Collins. I wasn't there to prove the HOA board had failed. I was there because every major decision deserves to be made with the complete picture. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere was tense but respectful. Parents sat beside residents who had originally supported the restriction. Older homeowners looked through the information they had received. Everyone seemed to understand that the issue was bigger than bicycles. It was about how a community chooses to solve problems. When Patricia Collins stepped forward, the room became silent. She stood at the front table with the confidence of someone who had spent years serving the neighborhood. She explained the board's concerns clearly. She talked about pedestrian safety, shared spaces, and the responsibility of the HOA to protect residents. Listening to her, I understood something important. Patricia wasn't trying to create conflict. She believed she was doing what a leader was supposed to do: prevent problems before they happened. The difference was that she believed a ban was the safest answer. I believed there was another way. After Patricia finished her presentation, the floor opened for homeowner comments. Several residents shared their opinions. Some supported the restriction because they worried about fast-moving bicycles near walking paths. Others explained that a complete ban felt unfair to families who had followed the rules for years. The conversation was honest because everyone cared about the neighborhood. Then Patricia called my name. I walked toward the microphone holding my folder. The room felt different from the one I had imagined walking into. It wasn't hostile. It was simply waiting for information. I started by saying something I truly believed. Safety mattered. No parent wanted their child creating danger. No pedestrian wanted to feel uncomfortable on a shared sidewalk. But safety decisions needed to match reality. I presented the HOA records showing the limited number of complaints. I explained that the concerns were real, but the evidence did not support a complete neighborhood-wide ban. Then I introduced the Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative. I showed the proposed slow-speed areas, educational guidelines, community feedback process, and safety improvements. I explained that the plan did not ignore problems. It addressed them directly while preserving something valuable for families. As each page appeared on the screen, I watched the expressions around the room change. Some residents who had arrived expecting an argument began asking questions about implementation. Others nodded as they recognized their own concerns reflected in the proposal. Even Patricia looked through the materials carefully instead of immediately defending the original restriction. For the first time, the conversation was no longer about whether bicycles belonged in Willow Creek. It was about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to create. And as I returned to my seat, I realized the most important part of the night had already happened. People were listening. The room stayed quiet after the final slide disappeared from the screen. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence that comes from disagreement. It was the kind of silence that happens when people are thinking carefully about what they just heard. I returned to my seat and placed the folder back on the table in front of me. For the first time since this entire situation started, I felt like everyone in that room was looking at the same problem instead of standing on opposite sides of it. Then the homeowner comments began. One by one, residents stood up and shared their thoughts. The first person to speak was Mrs. Anderson, the retired teacher who lived near the community park. She walked slowly toward the microphone and looked around the room before speaking. She didn't criticize the board. She didn't criticize parents. Instead, she reminded everyone why the conversation mattered. "We all want the same thing," she said. "We want people to feel safe here. But safety doesn't always mean removing something. Sometimes it means teaching people how to use it responsibly." Her words changed the energy in the room. Several residents nodded. Some of them had arrived believing the only choices were either a complete ban or no rules at all. But now they were seeing another possibility. More residents continued sharing their experiences. A father explained how riding a bicycle had helped his daughter become more confident and independent. An older homeowner shared that he supported clearer expectations because he enjoyed walking through the neighborhood every evening and wanted everyone to respect shared spaces. Another resident admitted that he had originally supported the ban because he assumed there had been serious safety problems. After seeing the records and hearing the discussion, he realized his opinion had been based more on fear than facts. Listening to those voices, I understood something important. Willow Creek had never been divided because people wanted different things. We were divided because we had started the conversation from different assumptions. Patricia Collins sat quietly at the board table, taking notes as every resident spoke. I watched her expression change throughout the meeting. She still looked serious, but there was something different now. She wasn't preparing a defense. She was listening. When Patricia finally picked up the microphone again, the room became silent. She thanked everyone for speaking respectfully and acknowledged that the discussion had revealed perspectives the board needed to consider. A strong community isn't one where every person agrees immediately, she said. A strong community is one where people can disagree, listen, and find a better solution together. Hearing those words from Patricia surprised me. Not because she changed her opinion completely in that moment, but because she recognized something every leader eventually has to learn. Listening is part of leadership. The board announced that the final vote would take place after reviewing the updated proposal and additional resident feedback. The bicycle ban was no longer the only option being considered. The Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative was now officially on the table. As neighbors slowly began leaving the clubhouse, the atmosphere felt completely different from the beginning of the night. People who had entered with frustration were now discussing ideas. Parents talked with older residents about safety improvements. Board members collected copies of the proposal. Outside, the cool evening air surrounded the neighborhood sidewalks that had started this entire conversation. I stood near my truck for a moment and watched families walking home. The fight wasn't finished yet. The final decision still had to be made. But something important had already happened. The community had stopped asking, "Who wins?" and started asking, "What is the best answer for everyone?" The days after the HOA meeting felt different. The tension that had filled Willow Creek for weeks was slowly being replaced by something I hadn't expected: cooperation. The same neighbors who had once debated across online messages were now talking face to face. The same residents who had entered the clubhouse convinced there was only one answer were now considering another possibility. The final vote was still ahead, but the community had already reached a turning point. For the first time, people were no longer defending positions. They were building a solution. A few days later, the HOA board scheduled the final decision meeting. I arrived at the clubhouse carrying the same folder I had brought before, but it no longer felt like a weapon. It wasn't a collection of arguments against the board. It was a record of what happens when people take the time to listen. Inside the room, the atmosphere was calmer. Residents sat together instead of separating into groups. Parents spoke with older homeowners. Board members reviewed the updated proposal one final time. Everyone understood that the decision would affect the future of Willow Creek. When Patricia Collins opened the meeting, she spoke differently than she had during the first discussion. She still believed safety was important. She still believed the HOA had a responsibility to protect residents. But now she also acknowledged something the community had shown her. A good rule must understand the people it affects. Patricia explained that the board had reviewed the original proposal, the homeowner feedback, and the Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative. She admitted that the first plan focused heavily on preventing possible problems, but did not fully explore solutions that could address those concerns without removing an everyday activity from families. It was a simple statement, but it meant a lot. Leadership was not about never changing direction. It was about having the courage to adjust when new information appeared. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for: the vote. The board members prepared their ballots while the room became completely silent. I looked around and saw the faces of neighbors I had spoken with throughout the process. Parents, retirees, homeowners who supported the ban, homeowners who opposed it. Every person in that room had played a part in reaching this moment. The first vote was counted, then the second, then the third. One by one, the results moved toward the final decision. When the last board member submitted their vote, Patricia looked down at the results before announcing the outcome. The proposed bicycle ban was rejected. The Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative was approved. For a moment, nobody moved. Then applause filled the room. It wasn't the kind of celebration that comes from defeating someone. It was the kind that comes from solving something together. I watched neighbors shake hands. I watched parents smile with relief. I watched residents who had disagreed for weeks congratulate each other. The result wasn't a victory for one side. It was a victory for the entire community. After the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sidewalks that had started this entire conflict were quiet beneath the neighborhood lights. A child passed by slowly on a bicycle, carefully moving aside as a couple walked in the opposite direction. It was a small moment, but it represented everything we had been fighting for. The vote had ended the ban, but the real change was bigger than that. Willow Creek had learned that good decisions don't come from the loudest voices in the room. They come from people willing to look at the facts, hear each other, and choose a better path forward. The weeks after the vote showed me something I never expected when this journey first began. I thought the biggest challenge would be stopping the bicycle ban. I thought the final vote would be the moment that decided everything. But I quickly realized the vote was only the beginning. A decision written on paper means very little unless a community is willing to turn that decision into action. Willow Creek had chosen a different path, and now we had to prove that the choice was the right one. The first step was putting the Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative into practice. The same neighbors who had spent weeks debating the issue were now working together to build something better. The HOA clubhouse, once a place filled with tension and disagreement, became a place where people gathered to exchange ideas. Parents sat beside older residents. Board members listened to volunteers. Everyone had a role in making the new system work. Patricia Collins became one of the strongest supporters of the changes. Watching her transformation was something I never expected. She still cared deeply about safety, but she approached the issue differently now. Instead of asking, "How do we prevent this from happening?" she started asking, "How do we help everyone do this correctly?" That small change in perspective created a completely different kind of leadership. The first improvements appeared near the community park. New signs were installed reminding bicycle riders to slow down and give pedestrians space. The messages weren't written as warnings. They were reminders that shared spaces belong to everyone. The sidewalks didn't feel controlled. They felt respected. Parents volunteered to organize a weekend safety event for children. Families brought their bicycles to the park, and volunteers helped younger riders practice stopping, turning, and navigating around pedestrians. I watched my son participate, and something about that moment stayed with me. Before this conflict, I assumed rules were simply things adults created for children to follow. But now I understood something different. The best rules are created with people, not just for them. The children weren't learning because they were afraid of punishment. They were learning because they understood responsibility. Over the following months, the neighborhood continued improving. Residents used the new feedback system whenever concerns appeared. Small problems were discussed before they became major disagreements. The HOA board held more open conversations before considering new policies. People became more comfortable sharing their opinions because they knew they would actually be heard. One afternoon, I saw Patricia standing near the park watching families move through the neighborhood. She smiled as a child slowly rode past an elderly couple, waited for them to pass, and continued down the sidewalk. "That is exactly what we wanted," she said. "A safe community." I looked at the scene and realized she was right. The goal was never about bicycles. It was never about proving one side wrong. It was about creating a place where families, pedestrians, and neighbors could all feel respected. Looking back at the original email that started everything, I remembered how quickly fear had spread through Willow Creek. One proposal had almost divided a community that had spent years building trust. But something better happened instead. People asked questions. They searched for facts. They listened. And together, they created a solution that protected what mattered without taking away what people loved. The sidewalks were still the same. The houses were still the same. But the neighborhood itself had changed. Willow Creek had learned that real progress doesn't come from the loudest demand or the fastest decision. It comes from patience, understanding, and the willingness to build something better together. Months after the HOA vote, I found myself standing on the same sidewalk where this entire story began. The morning sun was rising over Willow Creek, casting golden light across the neighborhood streets. The sound of bicycle wheels moving along the pavement had returned, but this time it sounded different. It wasn't a sound of uncertainty. It wasn't a sound of conflict. It was the sound of a community that had learned how to move forward together. My son rode ahead of me on his blue bicycle, the same one that had been sitting silently beside our garage when this journey started. Back then, That bicycle represented something we might lose. Now, it represented something we had protected. He slowed near the park entrance as a family walked across the path. He stopped, smiled, and waited until they passed. Then he continued riding. It was a small action, but it showed everything the Willow Creek Bike Safety Initiative was designed to create. Responsibility, awareness, respect. Looking around the neighborhood, I realized how much had changed. The signs near busy walking areas blended naturally into the community. The safety guidelines that once seemed like extra rules had become part of everyday life. Parents felt comfortable letting their children ride. Older residents felt respected while using the sidewalks. Everyone had found a way to share the same spaces. The most surprising change, however, wasn't on the sidewalks. It was inside the HOA clubhouse. Meetings that once started with frustration now started with conversations. Residents asked questions before making assumptions. Board members listened before creating new policies. The community had developed a new habit, understanding the problem before rushing toward a solution. One evening, I attended an HOA meeting and watched Patricia Collins address the residents. She stood at the front of the room, but she no longer looked like the person who had introduced the original ban. She looked like someone who had learned from the experience. After the meeting, she walked over and we talked for a few minutes. I thought leadership meant making the decision that prevented the most possible problems, she told me. But I learned that leadership also means listening to the people who live with those decisions every day. Hearing that meant more than winning any argument ever could. Because the truth was, Patricia wasn't the enemy. The original proposal wasn't created because someone wanted to hurt families. It came from a desire to protect the neighborhood. The mistake was believing that removing something was always the best way to solve a problem. Sometimes the better answer is building a system where people can succeed. As I walked home that evening, I passed the same sidewalks that had once created so much disagreement. Children rode nearby. Neighbors greeted each other. Families enjoyed the community without fear of another sudden restriction appearing overnight. I thought back to the first email I received. At that moment, I believed the fight was about bicycles. I was wrong. It was about something much bigger. It was about whether ordinary residents had a voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. It was about whether a community could choose facts over assumptions and cooperation over conflict. Willow Creek didn't become stronger because one side defeated the other. It became stronger because people were willing to listen long enough to find a better answer. And that was the lesson I carried with me long after the vote was forgotten. Real justice doesn't always arrive through a dramatic victory. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through open conversations, thoughtful decisions, and a neighborhood that remembers everyone deserves a place within it. Justice isn't loud. It's smart, patient, and inevitable.